Uh, as you all know, there are key domains and key areas of focus within PINS. And from the school self-assessments, we've picked out a core programme for this term, and I think we'll have some more beginning of next term, of presentations for every school who are taking part in PINS. And not all of it will be brand new to you. Some of you may find there's nothing necessarily new, but for all of us, it's always good, isn't it, just to take a step back and reflect on the key points, and check ourselves. It also, for the national evaluation and the Cheshire and Mersey evaluation, means that we're all of 40 of us, all 40 schools and all 7 places across Cheshire and Merseyside, we're all on the same page. You know, we're all looking at the same thing, we're all going about it in a similar way, and then there'll be some variations at place, and the national evaluation will take account of that. And what we get from it, specifically what you in schools get from it, will help the DFE decide if they're going to continue funding PINS and offer it to more schools. So for lots of reasons, we want it to work. But first and foremost, we want it to work because come next April, we want you to look back and think it was worth us doing that. And that's one of the reasons we've got Joan here today. Joan's got, and this is where she's going to squirm, but we're not in the same room, so I can say this. Joan's got a lot of experience. She's very highly regarded. She's definitely an expert on specifically children with autism and neurodiversity, but children with SEND generally. So in supporting mainstream schools, Joan is our go-to. She's got one of the Autism Education Trust licenses. There aren't many in the Northwest, but Joan is our go-to. So while she's based in Cheshire East, because this is the PINS project for Cheshire and Merseyside, there is always the potential that Joan can be our go-to for advice and guidance and just general encouragement as well, I think. So other than that, I'm going to hand over to Joan, so Joan can say anything else about herself that she would like to say and present to us today. And thank you so much, Joan. I know your team's depleted, and it's, you know, it's been a big ask of you. We do appreciate this.
Right, thank you very much, Leslie. I hope I'm not going to be a disappointment after all of that. Yeah, my background is I'm primary trained. I've also high school trained. I've been a SENCO, a learning mentor, a dyslexia specialist, a specialist teacher with Cheshire East Autism team, and I manage the team now. So I have a mix, a varied journey to here we are. So today I'm just going to take you through what we call our 10 top tips. Hopefully there will be nothing that's astonishingly new to you all, but as Leslie said, it can be useful just to have a reminder and a little bit of why. And our focus is on our little reception kiddies. So I'm going to share my screen, which I'm hoping has worked.
Yeah, we can see.
And it won't, let me just move my little banner so that I can click on things and start. Here we go. Right. So as Leslie said, we're also an AET trust. So I've given them a nod of recognition because some of the material I'm using today will be from their training. So we're looking at just practical, what am I going to do that will help my little neurodivergent reception kiddies settle in and cope and thrive. So my first one, and I'm not going to apologize for the obviousness of any of these, is you've got to know your student, because for every single little person with autism, with ADHD, with dyslexia, whatever their neurodivergent is, they are a unique individual, and how it affects them is particular to them. And it will save you a lot of time in the long run if you can know some key things about your little person from the very beginning. And the people that can tell you the most for our reception children are your parent carers. So we have some very anxious parents. We have some parents who have already learned that you have to be quite belligerent and aggressive to get anything. So building those positive relationships is super important. And having that information, that inside track around what does this little person like to do? What are they good at? How do they communicate? What are they like at home? And how do we transfer those skills from school to home and from home to school? And just to give you a little story as an example, if any one of you have read Barry Prizant's book, Uniquely Human, he gives a little example in that of a little fella in school, very distressed, just not engaging, running around, and couldn't communicate with staff. And all he was doing was shouting, "Dwa, dwa, dwa." And they couldn't figure out what is wrong. How can we help him? What's the matter? So eventually somebody rings home, explains to mum, mentions the dwa. And after a moment, mum says, "Oh, he might not be feeling very well." So the teacher is, I come again. Where does that come from? And she said, "Oh, about a year ago, he had a sore throat. Took him to the doctor, who said, do ah." And now every time he doesn't feel well in any way, that's his way of sharing that. So just that conversation with the parent meant, okay, now I get what's going on. So it's just such a useful, vital link for you. And the other thing I would say to you, which often pertains to later as children get a little older, is if you've got a parent coming in saying, "Do you know what, he was devastated last night and didn't want to come in this morning," or "I'm peeling him off me in floods of tears every morning," that you're listening to that and you're thinking, okay, what might be building up some stress in school, rather than doing that non-reassuring thing of going, "Oh, but they're fine in school." It's your problem, not our problem. So we need to communicate with our parents. You'll all be familiar with a one-page profile of some kind. And sometimes with our very small people, you can think, well, there's no way I can get this, because he's too little, they're not really communicating very well, or they tell me something random that I think doesn't have a purpose in this. And again, there was a little fella I came in to see because school were concerned he was being very aggressive. So kicking other children in the playground, hitting other children, and that was their concern. We have a very aggressive little boy. So I meet our little fella, and one of the things I asked him was, "What would you like to be when you grow up?" So he told me that he'd like to be a superhero. So I thought, okay. And now I'm not any good at drawing, but I drew a little stick, superhero, gave him a little cape. He was delighted with this. So I said, so I had him engaged at that point. So I said, "What would your superhero's skill, power be?" And he said, "Oh, invisible. I'd be invisible." I said, "Oh, so why would you be invisible?" "Oh, so then the baddies couldn't find me." Okay. "So would your superhero have another, power?" "Oh yeah, I'd be able to fly. So I could turn invisible and fly away and nobody could hurt me." And yes, that's a little fantasy. But if we were thinking we had an aggressive little person, but this is not a child who wants to be a superhero who can pow and bash and wham everybody. This is a little boy who wants to be invisible and to hide. So what we're thinking now is, do we have a very anxious little boy who is trying to protect himself? So sometimes using different ways of finding out information, it all comes together to give you a picture of who is this little boy that we're trying to help and support. I had a little boy who was autistic and ADHD, really quite, he used to like to walk around the classroom whistling. And when he went to get his water bottle, he would hit everybody on the head that he passed and do the same thing on the way back. You know, quite a disruptive little person. And sometimes I use a very simple draw from a sad face to a happy face on a line. And then I talk about things in school, and the children put along the line, you know, don't like reading, that's down the sad end, or I like my teacher, she's up the happy end. So we did that with this little fella, and we were nearly finished, and he suddenly went, oh, can we put forgetting on? And I was, okay, so where are we going to put that? Oh, that's very sad. So, right, tell me about forgetting that's down the sad end. And he said, oh, well, that's when I forget to be good. And this little boy, they had a system where they had a little pile of bricks on the desk. And every time he did something he ought not to do, like poke the girl beside him or whistle, they would take away a brick. And if he had no bricks left by break time, he couldn't go out for break. So it really illustrated to me his example of forgetting and forgetting to be good just illustrates that impulsivity that goes with the ADHD. This was not a little boy who was choosing to be naughty. This was a little boy who would do something spontaneously in the moment and then think, oh no, I've got it wrong again. So exploring with the young person, what is it that works for them and what doesn't? And then putting and talking to parents and putting it onto a profile, whatever way that profile works for you, gives you a really good start. So that's point one, is I know my young person. So my next thing is, right, what's my classroom like? So looking around and thinking, how obvious is it in my classroom where everything goes? How obvious is it where the quiet corner is? How, when I sit, my children sit and look at the interactive whiteboard, is that the main focus? Or do I have a pile of stuff all around it that's very distracting? Do we have things hanging from the ceiling that are catching the light and are very distracting? Just thinking about how quiet is the classroom? Is it one of these classrooms that when we pull back the chairs, there's this horrible echoey noise? You know, are we sitting children where there's a huge window and I can just look out and not listen at all? And we all start off, don't we, with our classrooms super tidy in September, and then gradually that starts to unravel. And the final one there, which is a random one you might think, is what are you wearing yourself? So it's thinking about, am I wearing a perfume or an aftershave or something that is really very distracting or unpleasant for a child with a high sensory intolerance around smell? Am I wearing something that is, am I wearing lots of stripes? Am I wearing something that is catching the light? So how distracting am I physically? Have I had a coffee before I sit and work with a young person? It's thinking about, you know, how you're presenting and the classroom. How is it set up? How easy is it to maneuver around? How clear is it? And that when I am a little person doing my numeracy or my literacy or having my choose time, is it really clear to me where I'm supposed to go and how I access things? So then I know my kid, I've got my classroom is sorted, and my next step is, okay, visuals. And you'll forgive the slightly nerdy joke there, I hope. So why are we using visuals? So we are giving information. We are providing our children with the who, the what, the why, and the where, right? We are providing structure. This is what's happening throughout the day. Now, please, can I ask you, if you have a nice visual timetable up, it needs to be correct, and you need to actually refer to it so that we take things down. We say to the kiddies, okay, what have we done? We've just done our phonics, miss. Yes, we have. What's happening now? It's choose time. Yes, it is. And we go through. And a real plea I would have is think carefully about your timetable and the language that you use with it. So when you say, for instance, it's tidy up time and then it's break, is it really? Are we tidying up? And then are we going to go to the toilet and wash our hands before we have our break? And if we are, then that needs to be included. I saw a little boy recently, and Senka was concerned that he was regularly at lunch and home time getting quite dysregulated. So I go along, we watch him, he's coping quite well. And then at 2:45, the teacher says, it's home time. So you need to all come and sit on the carpet. So everybody comes and sits on the carpet. However, home time is not actually until 3:15. There is now a half an hour of getting ready to go home. So little fella comes to sit on the carpet because he's desperate to go home. Home time, yay! I've sat on the carpet, I'm ready to go home. And the teacher goes, there's some fruit left over from lunchtime today, so you can all go and have a snack if you want. And then she talks to them, they're going to have a little bit of a story. And eventually, little fella who's becoming more and more agitated stands up, points to the home time symbol and goes, it's home time. And she goes, yes, it's home time, so sit back down. Now, by the time we got to 3:15, he was beside himself and needed another member of staff to try and, support him. And the Senko said to me, well, this happens at every day at home time and at lunchtime in the run up to lunch. And I know it sounds really obvious, but I would really urge you that don't tell children it's home time until we're lining up to go out the door. Because what happens is when we delay things like that, even though we might have brilliant reasons, our children will feel like they're just being lied to. And you tell me things and then they don't happen, and now I'm super frustrated. So that is how much structure and literal planning our children need. So we also talk about our visuals to support transitions, so that we are using our traffic lights, we are helping our children to know this is nearly finished and this is going to start. And now we're doing phonics, and next it's playing with the sound. Because for our children, our ADHD children, their little brains are flitting all around the place. So they may forget what you told them, and they're struggling to sequence their day. And our little autistic children are like, what the hell is going on? I just need to know from, moment to moment. We'll also use our visuals to think routines and skills. And the example there, think about flat pack furniture, your visual. How do I do this? So we teach our children, how to wash their hands. And my little fella who had learned that you need to pull your pants down before you go to the toilet, but needed a visual to say that you leave the classroom, get to the toilet, and then you pull your pants down. You don't stand up in the classroom, pull your pants down and shuffle to the toilet. That there's an order in which we do things, but little visuals help with that. And letting the children know, we've got visuals all around the environment saying this is where stuff goes and this is the area for this activity or that activity. The more we use visuals, the less reliant children are on somebody telling them what to do or how to do it, because they can navigate the environment themselves. So sometimes we use visuals and then we stop. And the reason given is, oh, I just tell him now and he's fine with it. But unless you're going to sort of follow him around like the president in the West Wing, giving him this is what's happening now and this is what's happening next for his whole life, it's not helpful. What we're trying to teach is independent skills here. So, and it's that our visuals stay on task. I know what I'm supposed to be doing now. So I've forgotten because there was a bird flew by the window and I watched that, or somebody made a noise over there, or something dropped on the floor, and now I have no idea what I was doing, but I'm back to, oh yeah, now we're supposed to be singing. That's what I'm doing. And just helping with that structure around this is how the day is going. It's so important. The other thing to bear in mind is that particularly for our autistic children, they can interpret language very, very literally, and usually from their own experience. So if you use a term in a different way, our children might struggle to know, what are you talking about? So because you can put up a picture and say, this is what I mean, got you, right? So visuals really, really help to eliminate confusion. And it's that management of time. And again, for both our autistic and our ADHD children, that concept of time passing, and our autistic children particularly, who can be a bit monotropic in their attention to something, can just get lost in flow. And our ADHD children can ping about in their head and think, oh no, it's nearly finished now, or I didn't realize that I was supposed to have started something. So those timers, clocks, sand timers, just again, and back to that first thing of knowing your child. For some children, timers are super stressful. Some children, the sand running through is just so fascinating. I'm just going to sit and watch that. So you have to find the timer that is right and supports that child. And our visuals, and I'll talk about change in a few minutes, will help our children around something different is going to happen. And then there's the whole complex world of social interaction and having those visuals that help with that, explaining what the rules are. And it might be the rules of a game that we go out and we play TIG on the playground at lunchtime, and this is where Den is, and we put them up in a picture form, and everybody knows those are the rules. Or we have it's one voice at a time in the classroom, and we have that on a visual. Helping our children to make choices, helping them to regulate, how do I cope? How do I know when I'm anxious? Had a little fella, and he felt that there was a difference between being angry and sad, which there is, but he liked one teacher to help him when he was angry and a different member of staff when he was sad. But when he was dysregulated, he wasn't able to explain that. So we helped him. He drew a little volcano for when he was angry. And on the back of that, we had the picture of the teacher, the member staff that helps him with that. And he had another little card that was a cloud with rain, and that was for being sad. And he had the picture of the person who helps him with that. So he had those, so he was able just to point. And then that meant that he wasn't having to explain something, and very quickly he could get the support that he needs. And also about helping our children to kind of understand their emotions and the emotions in others. And visuals are really helpful for that. Just when you are teaching emotions, I would just be very careful that we don't give our little people a sense that being happy equates to being good. And that's the emotion I'm supposed to feel all the time. So it is important to validate all emotions, and sometimes being super cross is actually the right response here. Because lots of the best changes in the world happen by people being very angry about injustice. So it's teaching our children that every emotion is valid and has its place, but it's how we express those and how we understand what we're feeling, and how to understand what other people are feeling. And visuals are really helpful for that. So, right, I know my kid. I've sorted out my classroom. I've got all my visuals ready, and I'm going to think about how am I going to sit these children, and observing. For some young people, why does he keep a little fella watched sitting on the carpet, and would gradually slide back until his head was resting against the desk behind him. And then nice member of staff would move him forward. You're going to bang your head. Okay. And then after a few minutes, you'd see him gradually scooting back until his head was against the desk again. So for him, he needed to feel something behind him. That sitting in a space just didn't make him feel safe. He needed something behind him. Some of our children need to sit on a chair rather than on the carpet. And it's thinking about, if I am sitting on the carpet and I'm a little person with a lot of sensory needs, I can smell Mary Patricia's coconut shampoo. I can smell that Patrick Joseph's just eaten crisps. The carpet feels a bit hairy and scratchy. I would love to stroke Fidelma's ponytail in front of me because that looks really soft and silky. So I'm getting an intense sensory seeking and sensory avoiding experience just sitting where I am. So it's thinking about what's the impact of this and how do we support our children to sit in a place that enables them to focus and to learn. And some of our little people, when they're doing a task, are much better when they're on their own. And some of them are much better if they have a little friend with them. And it's thinking about all those distractions and keeping them to a minimum. And I've touched on the sensory differences there. Okay, so we've got all our visuals in place. We plan the hell out of everything, but stuff changes, doesn't it? And particularly, let's face it, after half term in the run up to Christmas, primary school can get really different as a place. And even in terms of things like suddenly there's a Christmas tree in reception when there never was before. Or we're rehearsing for the school play and we were going to do PE, but suddenly the hall is free, so we're all going to do that instead. So there are changes. So it's helping our children to know what is going to change. And so we're actively teaching, back to our visuals, a visual for something different. And we're teaching our children what that looks like. And we can have a visual timetable where we are including what I would call a known unknown. Something might change today. Here is our visual for change. We're not quite sure when. So it might still be a tricky thing for our young people, but I'm expecting it. I knew something different was going to happen. We've used our different thing, so I can kind of get my head around that. That's sort of okay. But when we're also thinking about, we might have a change that is a teacher going on maternity leave, or we might have a new support assistant in the classroom, or we're going to have a visitor today. So there might be, or we're going on a trip. Things that are different to the norm. So your comic strip conversations, but particularly social stories with pictures in advance. This is what's going to happen. And explaining that situation that the child can take home and parent carer can read at home so that children are prepared for what's going to be different. Right, so we've done all that. So we now think, Joan, when are we going to start teaching these kiddies? Right, so we need good attention, don't we? And we need our children to process what we're trying to teach them. Now, this is a bugbear of mine, I have to admit, is how are we describing good listening? And really, I want you to think about this. Most little children, from the time they start school, learn very, very quickly that good listening is sitting nicely on my bottom with my legs, arms folded, my legs crossed, looking at the teacher. Yeah? Now, if I am a little person with ADHD, that is not how I listen. I need to move or fidget. And if I am having to sit, so I learned two things very quickly. Firstly is that I am not good at good listening. Yeah, according to the teacher. So this is the thing I'm not good at. And I have seen it happen where the little person who needs to move the most is the person who's left sitting on the carpet the longest because they have been naughty and not sat nicely. So Mary Patricia, who sat like a little pudding and didn't move and could have sat there all day, is allowed to go off for her break first because she has been good, whereas little Patrick Joseph, who really, really struggled to do this and tried super hard but needed to keep moving, he's still left sitting there. So we've got to think about that. Our autistic child may not listen by making eye contact. That can be painful and difficult and does not help processing of language and thinking. What I would like to see in classes is that we are saying, oh, I can see that Patrick Joseph is doing his good listening because he's fiddling. He's got his fiddle toy out for his listening. I can see that Mary Patricia is doing her good listening because she's drawing. She's doing her listening drawing. I can see that Fidelma is doing good listening because she sat up beautifully on her bottom looking at me. Yeah. And we are acknowledging that different children listen in different ways. And once we make children who don't listen by sitting still, sit still, we might get a child that's sitting still, but they have not processed one word that we've said to them. The other thing that we need to consider is processing speed. Some of our children take much longer to process what you said and need that space. We need to keep our instructions and our language consistent and allow them time to answer questions. And you know, the lollipops with children's names on or wheels, don't do that with our neurodivergent children because they're just not able to respond in the moment. Now, for some of our little people, and I'm sure you do as well, because I know in Cheshire East we have a lot of very complex little people who've come into reception who have no language at all and who have not yet learned joint attention. So we maybe with some of our children be at that point where we need to be actually teaching how to attend. And again, it's thinking about how long am I going to go on for with my verbal input? You know, am I putting breaks in to meet those needs? And am I doing it in a preemptive way? So am I giving my little person a break so that when they come and sit down for the next piece of input, they're actually much better able to listen? So then we think about your own communication. So you've got to think about, if I have a window open, if there's noise outside, is my voice competing against background noise? The other thing I would say is really try and avoid what I would call stereo input, where the teacher is talking and there's a learning support assistant kind of translating for the child, you know, like somebody in the United Nations, you know, and the child then is trying to process both at the same time, or trying to block one out and listen to the other. So we have one voice, one communication at a time, and then we follow up for support. And you pause between sequences and you keep it to one instruction at a time, and you use the child's name so that they know that you're talking to them. And also, we're not doing sarcasm. We're not hinting. We're not doing, you know, the body language thing where I'm giving you a look and I'm expecting that you've picked that up. We're not using all those figures of speech, and our instructions are unambiguous. And we're not doing the rhetorical questions. Do you need to keep shifting on your bottom while I'm trying to talk to you? Or do you need to keep picking your nose? You know, we're not saying, and we're not asking a question that isn't a question. Would you like to come and sit on the carpet? If we mean come and sit on the carpet, that's what we say. Don't ask a question and then, you know, a little fella, he was outside at break time and the TA came up to him and said, would you like to do your phonics now? And he said, no, because no, he didn't want to. But that really wasn't her question. What she really wanted to say was, let's go and do our phonics. Yeah. So it's thinking about that. And that unambiguous thing, I mean, I'm always conscious of it. you'd have picked up maybe from my accent, I'm an Irish woman, we say that terrible thing, which is, I'll be with you now in a minute. Now, that completely doesn't make any sense at all, because I'm neither going to be with you. I can't be with you now and in a minute at the same time. And also, I'm not being truthful, am I? Because I'm not going to actually be with you in either time frame. So it's thinking about, what am I saying? Does it make sense to the young person? So, and how quickly am I providing information? So, and here's the really tricky bit, is this, we often will hear people say, oh, he's just picking and choosing what he wants to do. You know, if we're doing X, he's really in, you know, he's great, he can concentrate for hours. But as soon as I want him to do this, he won't. And for most of our children, this is not a won't, this is a can't. Our children cannot engage with and focus on activities that don't have any meaning for them. We have to capture their attention. So why am I doing this? Is it interesting? Is it fun? Can we use the young person's interests? I had a little person who was not making a lot of progress with his phonics, and the person who was doing that intervention with him was said, well, he's only got 2 sounds. He can do d, because he's into dinosaurs and the picture is a dinosaur, and he can do t because he's into buildings and it's the picture of a tower. Now, I did say to her, well, could we find dinosaurs, different pictures of dinosaurs that begin with different letters? Could we have B for a brontosaurus, for instance, you know, T for a triceratops? Now, her initial response to that was, oh, that's not the scheme we use. And you think, well, the point of this, and he was being taught one-to-one in a separate room. So you think, well, you know, like, we're trying to teach him phonics. If we know that he's into dinosaurs, let's see if that will work. So it's thinking about, how do we drag in, because we know our child, because we've done our one-page profile, because we've spoken to parents, we know what they enjoy. Can we shoehorn that in somewhere? And this last one here that I've added in is, can you separate handwriting from literacy? Particularly for our little dyslexic kiddies who may really, really struggle with handwriting, you know, but they can still have great ideas. So it's thinking about, how do we encourage our young people to think that they are, to know that I am good at writing a story. I am good at listening to a story and telling you what I think is going to happen next. So I'm actually good at literacy. What I'm really terrible at is handwriting. And that's because maybe I'm not ready for that yet. You know, so we separate out those two things. So the children are not learning that I'm no good at English when actually they are. This one is huge for reception children, because so much of their day is meant to be play and is certainly social interaction. And it is really important to understand, where is this child in terms of their social skills? What are their skill set? Do they know how to play with other children? And are we need to teach them that. And when you look at our little people in reception, about 90% of the time, there's an expectation that you're going to share. Yeah. And we keep telling our children that you need to play nicely and you need to share, and you can't snatch that away from them. And if they want the blue Duplo block, then you need to let them, have a turn. And we do this. Now, our neurotypical children have the social skills typically necessary for that. But more importantly, what they have is the social desire. They have understood and experienced that other children are kind of fun. And they've also experienced that while sharing might suck, let's face it, if I want to have friends, I need to share. And because I want to have friends, I share. And people smile and say, oh, thank you very much. And I get social capital out of that. Now, if I am an autistic child, I may find that I really don't care whether there's anybody else in the class, and I really love playing with Lego, but I hate playing with Lego with anybody else because that means I have to share it. And why would I want to do that? If I am a young person with ADHD, they can come across a lot of social rejection because of that impulsivity, and that inability maybe to read when they've gone too far. And so they can make mistakes socially that make them then quite anxious about how do I do this right. So we need to teach sharing. We also have to, I think, provide some non-sharing time and resources, some time for our neurodivergent children where, do you know what? We have a sign that says this little area here is a non-sharing area. So you can go there and you can play with the stuff, and it's one child at a time, and that's it. And you don't need to share. And then when we want you to share, we're going to teach you how to do it. But we're going to use activities that are better and more fun with two people than with one. And we're also going to try and be quite understanding. I watched a little boy playing outdoors, and he had set up around the side of the playground. There was a lot of, tires and pieces of wood and things like that. And I was watching him, and he said, I'm making a world. So he set this all up very carefully. And then he decided he was going to be the guardian of his world because he didn't want anybody else in it. And he was going to stand, and he said, oh, and I know my judo. So I'm going to be a guardian with judo. And then other children saw what he was doing. And as they approached him, he did his judo moves, but they just ignored him because he wasn't hitting anybody, and they just went around him. And then they were all climbing on and jumping on what he's built. And he was getting quite agitated, saying, you're going to break it. But they pretty much ignored him. They kept going. His frustration was rising. And he was getting quite upset about this invasion of his world. And then the bell goes, and the teacher comes around and says to the children, let's tidy all this away. So then all the other children started putting away everything he'd created. And at this point, he's beside himself. They're breaking my world. So when he comes back in from playtime, what we've got is a little boy who was having some lovely downtime, some lovely recharge time, creating a world, and he feels that's been invaded. He feels that the other children were mean. He feels that the teacher was mean. So you think at this point he hates everybody, doesn't he? And his experience of play was not positive. And so when he comes back into the classroom, this is not a little person who is now ready to sit and interact. And maybe a little person who's feeling a huge amount of resentment for those other children. So it's thinking about what is that experience like if you are a person who likes time to himself, and how are we supporting that? When we do get to a point where we're getting children to work in little groups, it's that visual around whose turn is it? We're keeping the groups very small. And again, during the day, we're building in time for our neurodivergent children where you can just do your little job by yourself, do the task on your own. You can play by yourself. And we're teaching you the skills before we just keep putting you into those difficult situations. And we're also teaching, and this is really important, our neurotypical children that sometimes Mary Patricia loves playing with everybody, but sometimes she needs to be able to sit and color all by herself. And she's not being mean, and it's okay that she doesn't want to play today. And that doesn't mean that she's not your friend anymore. And you can be a good friend to her by letting her have some time. And some schools have talked about having an unbuddy bench as opposed to a buddy bench. The buddy bench where I sit on this if I'm lonely and I want someone to play with, that we have an unbuddy bench where I can sit if you're all doing my head in and I just want to be by myself. And we teach our children, do you know what? That's okay. And a final tip here is around asking for help. because no matter how much you put in place, sometimes things go wrong, don't they? And it's teaching our children, do you know what? Sometimes you're not going to know the answer. Sometimes you're going to make a mistake. Sometimes you're going to be stuck. And it's how to ask for help. And I would say, really think about, how do I respond to questions? And again, thinking of our little ADHD kiddies who maybe have got distracted, even internally, have zoned out, and you've explained something, and then they look around and they think, oh, Janie, everybody's doing stuff. Should be doing something. And I go, what are we supposed to be doing? And you've just explained it. But it's having that patience to go, I'm glad you asked me that. This is what we're doing. Because it's when a child asks you, what am I supposed to be doing? That means they're ready to do it, aren't they? They want to do it. And it's really recognizing that not attending isn't a choice for our children. It's a consequence of the way their brains are wired. So we need to support that, and we need to support, and then back to our visuals, so that when our children forget what they're supposed to be doing, they can pick it up, but also that we're giving a visual for asking for help. Now, I've put on that asking for help applies to you too, because this is tough stuff. And I was in a reception class last week, and and there were some complex children in there, as well as some more, would you say, if you can say, typical neurodivergent children, which I know is that an oxymoron. But the poor teacher was saying, Joan, by the end of the day, I'm exhausted. She said, and I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old at home, and I feel like I've nothing left for them. And she was doing a great job, but it was exhausting. So I think being able to say, do you know what, this is really hard. Does anybody have any ideas? Is really important. So those are our 10 tips. So we're knowing our student, we're setting up our classroom, we're using visuals, we're thinking about where are they sitting, we're letting them know if we're going to do something weird and different. We're thinking about, okay, how are you listening? How are you processing? We're thinking about our own language. We're adapting our teaching and drawing in those interests, and we're supporting the hell out of the social development, and we're not asking children to interact and play before they have the skills to do so. And then we're teaching them, how do I ask for help? And the reason for the plant little visual there is that, I mean, I'm not a great gardener, but if anyone are gardeners, you think if you buy a plant that needs sunshine and sandy soil, and you plant it in shade in a clay soil and it dies, you don't blame the plant, right, for not doing well. You think, I'll put it in the wrong environment. So for our little children, we've got to get the environment right for them. We can't change their brains. That's how they're wired. What we have to do is to change the environment. And what we're trying to do here is to create that bridge, that neurodiverse, genuine world, where we all understand each other. And without being too preachy here, I do think that a neurodivergent friendly approach supports all children. So that is me.